Okay, Matt, tell me the stats.
All right. So Led Zeppelin's Physical Graffiti, it comes in at number 25 in 1970s on Best Ever Albums, number 5 in 1975, number 101 of all time, and in Rolling Stone's list, it comes in at number 144.
Okay. So we last talked about Houses of the Holy, which was the previous album of this, back on episode 21 of the show. And just as a little recap to continue on with the story of Led Zeppelin, Houses of the Holy came out in March of 73, and this album came out in February 24th, 1975. So after Houses of the Holy came out, they toured for the rest of the year in 73, and May 5th of 73 in Tampa, on the second date of their 9th U.S. tour, they set a record of 56,800 fans for the largest number of people attending a concert, beating the Beatles at Shea Stadium in 1965. So that's kind of to put in perspective of how popular they were, essentially. All four of them were exhausted from touring after returning to England in August of 73. And John Paul Jones was especially exhausted and had started to consider quitting the band, and was mulling that over. And Peter Grant, their manager, told them, you can do that, but why don't you just take some time off and recollect and, get away from it all before you make that decision. In the autumn of 73, having that break from touring, they decided to plan to start their own record label, Swan Song Records, with the idea being that, like Apple Records and others, the idea being complete artistic and financial freedom from the record company. Their 5-year contract with Atlantic was expiring on October 28th of 73, so this was in perfect timing with that and to set them up for the future. The label launched in May of 74, and Physical Graffiti is actually the third album to appear on that label. They used, in addition to their music, they were promoting other artists and signing them. And the other albums that came out before them are Bad Company's debut album and the Pretty Things album was also there. And there was this other band as well that's not as well known, and I didn't write them down.
Some other guys,
yeah,
in a band.
Fun fact: this album was originally supposed to be recorded in another mobile studio, not the Rolling Stones mobile studio.
There was a second one?
Yes, a mobile studio owned by Ronnie Lane, the former bassist and co-founder of the Small Faces. And the Rolling Stones mobile studio was not available at the time, so they brought this one in to start, and it did not. Not much was accomplished, unfortunately.
Is anybody else surprised that the Rolling Stones mobile studio lasted as long as it did? I mean, with all the debauchery and alcohol and probably urination and vomiting and all that stuff that
was the mobile studio where they went to get away from the debauchery that was going on at all other times, or did it continue?
Yeah, but I'm sure it had to continue, right? Just because it moves doesn't mean you stop boozing.
What? Also, why aren't there more mobile studios now?
Yeah.
That seems appealing to me, but
everything was better back in the day, Josh.
And it's also probably a lot easier to have a mobile studio right now because all you need is a computer. You don't even need
Everybody's
tape and stuff, right? Yeah.
I think your mobile studio is your iPhone now.
True. So due to John Paul Jones not being around during that time, he was spending time with his family. Peter Grant used the studio to record Bad Company's debut album. Ultimately, they went back to Headley Grange, which is where country place where they recorded many of their other albums, and they finished this album at Olympic Studios in London, as they have in the past. In 1975, Physical Graffiti came out and consisted of 15 songs, 8 of which were recorded at the Country House in Headley Grange in 74, and 7 were even earlier. The 7 were unreleased tracks from various Led Zeppelin sessions from Led Zeppelin 3, 4, and Houses of the Holy, all between the period of recorded between the period of 70 and 72, or at least written and demoed. The new 8 songs went longer than a full LP, so they decided to make a double LP. And Jimmy Page said the idea for a double album was there from the start, since they didn't want to omit any of the new songs that they were including. There's no kind of rhyme or reason for the order of the tracks, meaning, the new songs aren't all first and then followed by the unreleased ones. They're mixed in between, kind of alternating almost. By the time this album was released, it had been 2 years since Houses of the Holy came out. So that was kind of a significant amount of time for a band that is known for constant touring and, releasing albums almost like every year, it seems like, since we've talked about so many of them. The new songs on this album, in case you're interested, are Custard Pie, In My Time of Dying, Trampled Underfoot, Cashmere, In the Light, 10 Years Gone, The Wanton Song, and Sick Again. I wrote those out in order as they appear on the album, so you can kind of get the feel of that. This a couple fun facts about a few of these songs on this album. In My Time of Dying was a reworking of Bob Dylan's version of In My Time of Dying, which was an old gospel blues song called Jesus, Make Up My Dying Bed. So they're definitely influenced by Dylan. He's there again. Cashmere was reused by Puff Daddy with Jimmy Page on the 1998 Godzilla soundtrack, making a connection to Heroes from the Wallflowers.
And this brings me to my teaser from last week. I remember that those songs were on the same soundtrack, or at least it was Come With Me. It wasn't exactly Cashmere, but I remember. Yeah. And that was my tie-in. I was going to bring that up, but yes, those are both on. Those are the 1-2 punch of the Godzilla 1998 film version.
Correct.
I believe that's with Matthew Broderick, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep. It's directed by Roland Emmerich, and not on Spotify. I had to go to YouTube to hear that Puffy version of song. And yeah, it's pretty much like Cashmere with Puffy going, yeah.
Instead of getting Led Zeppelin going like, oh, come along, you get like, get the thing over so
they did that on SNL too. I remember Jimmy Page and Puff Daddy did that on SNL. It was a pretty good performance, I have to say. So
Robert Plant, much more appealing coming in off that riff than Puff Daddy was.
Indeed.
That's my takeaway there.
Trampled Underfoot was the only single released on this album. That was the A-side single with Black Country Woman as the B-side. I thought that was interesting. And the album was very successful, debuting at number 1 in the UK and 3 in the US album charts. It went to number 1 a week later in the US and stayed there for 6 weeks. It was also the first ever album to go platinum on pre-orders alone. And after their release, all of their previous albums re-entered the top 200 on the Billboard, and they went on another North American tour. And this was the first band to ever have 6 albums on the Billboard charts at the same time.
Wow.
So
that's pretty good.
Yeah. So they were popular. Critics love this album as well as fans. Jim Miller of Rolling Stone saying this is possibly the best band in the world, or at least the only one that could rival the Rolling Stones and The Who in terms of live performance. The album cover was originally a die cut cover, meaning there are
Who
cuts.
Who is Jim Miller? Out of curiosity, I've never heard him before in our critics.
I don't know. I mean, he was. I didn't look to see what his. I mean, he was there when it was out. So.
Gotcha.
But yeah, he's not like the other famous people that we've talked about.
He's no Stephen Thomas Erlewine.
I know Robert Christgau always has hated Led Zeppelin. It's like what he's known for, So
the album cover was originally a die cut cover, meaning there are cuts in the windows where you can see different things and you can put different things behind it. One of the inner covers of Physical Graffiti spelled out the name of the album, Physical Graffiti, with a letter in each window. And then there's other ones with images, various pop culture images like members of the band dressed as women, Buzz Aldrin, Queen Elizabeth, Lee Harvey Oswald, the Pope, King Kong, random shit, basically. The album was originally supposed to be released on November 29th of 74, but again, there are delays in the production of the album cover, which I feel like came up before on one of their albums, and so it finally came out in 1975. To answer John's question, Physical Graffiti was called that because of the graffiti on the cover of the album. And also, Jimmy Page said, quote, there was an awful lot of physical energy used in producing the album. So not really that interesting in my opinion.
Wah, wah.
I know. I was like, what makes the graffiti physical graffiti as opposed to just graffiti? So,
yeah.
Okay.
Robert Plant said this album represents the band at their creative peak, and it's his favorite album. Jimmy Page also said that it was a high watermark for the group. And since this is the last time that we talk about Led Zeppelin, after we talk about our reviews of the album, I'll give some follow-up and close them out essentially. So, Johnny boy, what did you think of Physical Graffiti?
Well, boy, this was certainly a heavy album, wasn't it? Boy, it was uncompromisingly heavy. I was somewhat shocked. It's been a long time since I've gone through the Zeppelin discography, and so it's been a long time since I've listened to Physical Graffiti. I don't think I ever processed how heavy it was. Like, I knew I liked it. You have like sort of thumbnail notes that you make to yourself of the things you describe to someone, and my take was always with this album was some of their best stuff and a little bit too long. I don't know if I'd say it's too long in the sense that it was bothersome. Do I feel like the second half wasn't as strong as the first half? I went on to see like how this broke down. There's a side 1, 2, 3, and 4, and the parts that I identified as side 1 and side 2, I would say, are by far the strongest in my opinion. Side 4 is interesting to me because there's some songs like the Wanton Song and Black Country Woman that kind of do a little bit different than what Led Zeppelin sounds like sometimes. Side 3, in my opinion, is probably the weakest side. But it was interesting to hear you say that some of the stuff was recorded real time and some was older. Did you say it was like from 71?
For any time between 70 and 72, I believe is what it said.
So they were recording this stuff when they were doing the number albums. So that would have been around 3 and 4, right?
Yeah, 3, 4, and Houses of the Holy. It's all in that period. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that's interesting. I'd be curious to see which songs line up there, because I could have told you that like Custard Pie is not tied to any of that time, because that's a really good song. First of all, I'd like to point out it's probably my favorite song on the album, and Cashmere also is not tied to that time. You can tell sonically, and some of those songs are really heavy. Like, in a way that I don't think of Led Zeppelin being that heavy. You know, I'm not going to say they're like Black Sabbath sludgy heavy, but they're heavier than I'm used to for Led Zeppelin. I do think this does represent like a Led Zeppelin at that period in their career where they've mixed like the energy and all the things that are great about listening to a really good band in their early stages, mixed with like what happens when you get a level of professionalism later in your career, like a sonic tightness. They definitely have that. But, you know, some bands, they kind of fade out after that early period. And Zeppelin has definitely not faded out. They're still vibrant and have a lot of new ideas, like at this stage of their career, but it's merged with like a growing maturity, I think, and tightness, I would describe. That sounds like a band that has become big and has played live and has recorded a variety of albums and kind of knows artistically what they want to do. I still am fascinated about why they decided to merge new tracks with older ones instead of just putting the older ones on sort of a, because like later in their career, is it Coda? Is that the name of the album? Coda. Where they take all their outtakes, right? And I'm surprised they didn't do something like that with the older stuff from that period. Not that it's obtrusive in the album, but it's interesting that it's like a half and half album. It's a really interesting construct for an album, especially where they're at in their career. But Robert Plant always sounds great, but he sounds particularly vibrant on this album, lyrically. He's not just vocal tricks as much on this album. I feel he's a little bit more of a well-rounded singer. I've always loved his voice, but he's got a little bit more tone and depth, I think, in this album. And yeah, the guitar work from Page is fantastic in this album. Once again, it always is solid, and the rhythm section certainly from Led Zeppelin always stands out. John Paul Jones is always considered one of the better bassists, and Bonham, some people will say they think he's the best rock drummer ever. But to me, this is a Jimmy Page album. More like as a standout, more so than some of the others. Not because he hasn't done great guitar work in the other albums, but that's the jump off the page sonically from this. It is a lead guitar album. That's my initial thoughts. I can expand, but I'm curious to hear what you guys think.
Yeah. How about you, Matt?
So I think that Led Zeppelin is a really good band.
Yeah, I think so.
I think they're a really good band. Yeah, I think they really are.
It's kind of a hot take, Matt.
Yeah, I know. Sorry, guys. Just don't murder me. So this is an interesting album because just listening to it, this is a good example of recognizing many of the songs. There wasn't a ton of surprises on here, but also never really being aware of their names. So when I hear a song like In the Light or 10 Years Gone or the Wanton song, like I know these songs, but I don't. I never knew that was the name of the song. So it's kind of interesting. It's like, oh, that's on this. I love this record. This might be my favorite Zeppelin album, and it is long. I don't think it's too long. And I would go so far as to say maybe this might be my favorite double album that we've covered. I'm trying to think of another one. Exile is up there as well. But I'm trying to think of another double album that's this consistent. And I don't know if you guys could.
The Dominoes album, I would personally put up there. I know you guys had different views of it.
I know I like that album a lot. I would put this above that. I guess that was a double album. Okay, that was a pretty solid one. But I still like this one definitely.
Yeah, I thought about that too. Maybe the Elton John album, but
yeah, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road.
That's good too. It's not this, I think this might, and I think I might like this. It's a good question if I like this better than Exile. I think this is a really consistent album. For a double album, I think it's really consistent. And I disagree, John. I think I like the second half better. I think that this actually gets better as it goes along. I think the variety, it is heavy, but there's variety on here, and you're also not getting, and John, I would think that you would like to appreciate this more because there's not a whole lot of the gnomes and wizards and, medieval sounds of this.
I greatly appreciate, because they do things like Eastern sounds, right, at different times, and mandolin. I feel like that's what they substituted out, which was a good choice for me personally.
Yeah, and I think that's like, of all the Zeppelin sounds, I think that's really the only one that's kind of missing on here. So there's the variety. I love that the end of this stuff, like Boogie with Stu and Black Country Woman were really nice surprises, really nice throw-ins there. I really liked, the Seaside...
Down by the
Seaside. I thought that sounded like a Band of Horses song. There was a lot of I was having a lot of tie-ins to some modern acts and modern artists that certainly, obviously, it's not like they influenced Zeppelin, but like that you could see that influence from Zeppelin on them. But Down by the Seaside sounded like kind of like a Band of Horses.
Like alt country almost
folk,
at times.
Yeah, like folk rock kind of thing. And for sure, I in my time of dying, that's got Jack White all over it. I mean, that's like, that's just a very heavy Jack White influence type song. But this was just great. And the songs, I think it's interesting that you're kind of differentiating. These were the songs that were older and these were the ones that were more recent. That list of songs that you had that were the more recent ones are probably some of my most favorite ones on here. In the Light was a great. 10 Years Gone is a great song. There's a lot of cool guitar riffs on here that are not like the flashy solo guitar riffs. This is just the guitar riff that's going to sustain the song throughout the majority of the time that we're playing it. And it's just really cool guitar parts that are kind of unique, that are definitely that stand out as just being immediately, engaging, I think.
Yep.
Songs, and of course Cashmere is a classic song. I mean, that album, that song never gets old. And the way that it builds, and there's the two different parts, and there's like a part right around the 4 minute, 4:15, 4:20 minute where like they transition from like the kind of the more upbeat or lighter part, but then then Plant's voice takes you into the dun-dun-dun, dun-dun, and it kind of carries over that. That part is awesome. That might be my favorite part of the record. It's just a really well done transition that just really stands out. But there's not a weak song on here. I love like the Brawny or whatever that's, that instrumental. That's a cool part. It's a little quick, Jimmy Page, acoustic guitar riff that's kind of cool. But yeah, I think the variety really stands out here as well, and it's solid, man. It's a long album. It doesn't play like a long album. It's an album that's so good that I get lost in the length. That doesn't bother me at all. So this is a very high. I always thought that Led Zeppelin 4 was my favorite album. That the highs on that still might be because I still love Stairway, and I still love not Going to California, but When the Levee Breaks, I think might be my other favorite Zeppelin song. But this album stands out amongst the other ones for sure, as being up there for me. But just great riffs, really good songs, really good variety. Maturity, I think, too, is a word that comes to like some of because the later songs there's a maturity, mature sounding quality to it that might be lacking in some of their other stuff. So, yeah, very surprised at how much I like this because it never got old. So a big thumbs up for me. I really liked it.
Yeah, I'm right there with you guys. Every time I listen to a Led Zeppelin album for this show, I feel like, okay, is this my favorite album now, or is it every subsequent one has something that I haven't heard before or am revisiting and forgot how good it was. I was like John. I was like, if it was just the first LP side of the album, the first 6 songs, I think that would be like a perfect album basically. But then as I listened to it more on the second half, I really kind of appreciated the nuances that they bring and kind of the exploration and depth that they have brought to their sound. I can't take full credit on this, but they incorporate, things like the clavinet is now in their songs a lot more, and the Moog synthesizer is in some of these songs. And like you guys said, bringing that Middle Eastern prog sound into their songs, it's almost like Beatles-esque in The Light, for example. Like those things weren't there in those earlier albums that were all like predominantly guitar driven and the 4 of them. So they're really branching out and adding these things, which like adds a depth to their album, I think, and a maturity, like you said, Matt. So I mean, I think The Rover is probably one of my favorite songs after listening to it so many times. It just has this. So first of all, I think I'm a sucker for any drum lead-in on a song where it starts with the drums and then they come in. That just kind of hooks me right in. And then Page's guitar is pretty out of this world on that song. Like you said, John, Custard Pie is a great. They really like bring the blues rock, foundation into that as like kind of a centerpiece and a great opening track. Even though they experiment with all these other different things, they still have that blues background, and that's throughout on this album. And I always love this. Trample Underfoot has this really funky sound to it, which is due to the clavinet, I think, and that's something we haven't heard
is that what that is? Okay.
From Led Zeppelin before. And then, and Bron, it's pronounced Bron E. Iyer, which it's Welsh. I enjoyed that as well. It is their only acoustic number on this album, but it fits with their previous kind of acoustic sounds on other albums. And a fun fact about that, this is the last time an entirely acoustic track appears on a Led Zeppelin album. Down by the Seaside really reminded me of Neil Young and Crosby, Stills and Nash, and kind of that West Coast rock sound, which is
Laurel
something
Canyon.
we haven't heard from Led Zeppelin before. And then Night Flight has the Hammond organ on it as well. So they're just, they sprinkle in these things. And if because we listen to these albums and we've kind of gone through this progression of looking for these instruments and stuff, I really picked up on it this time listening to them. Fun fact about Boogie with Stu, that is Ian Stewart formerly from the Rolling Stones on piano in that song, and that's named after him, and that's got that country beat. So gosh, if I don't know, it's hard for me to say. I really love this album. I also agree that this is probably my favorite double album maybe ever. If I had to, I'd have to look at a list of double albums to know for sure, but the I really enjoyed I love the first half, the first LP, and I really enjoy the second half. So it's splitting hairs at this point. I kind of love all of Led Zeppelin's albums. There hasn't really been a weak one.
Even comparing it to something like the White Album, which I love, but the White Album's got some filler on it, man. The White Album is, it's got some stuff. Not even talking about Revolution 9. There's some stuff on there that's like, but this is just like straight up top to bottom, like really good.
Yep. And like you guys and John said, it's still these all four of them are just so good at what they do. The drums are amazing on this. The bass is great, and John Paul Jones is playing all the different keys as well on this. And then Plant's voice is like so mature and just like, I think it's like peak. He just knows how to utilize his voice to like maximum effect. And then Page's guitars, which is, I think, the one thing that always brought me into Led Zeppelin is just his guitar riffs, and there are some bangers on here for sure. So any other thoughts before I wrap up them with some other facts and thing? John, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, I just thought it was a really interesting evolution of Led Zeppelin. I think this is also considered the last great Led Zeppelin album, right? The other two sell well, but this is the last of that Murderer's Row of 6 straight, like, hugely well-regarded albums.
Yeah. There's not a I mean, this is a band that's like, it's like, talk about the cool or the en vogue thing to do is to like the Zeppelin t-shirts and posters in college dorms and like this, the cool band to like, but there's a reason for it. I mean, like, as just kind of before this podcast, it was kind of just knowing them kind of here and there, having access to like basically one album, and hearing songs there, but it just really, really getting into it has been awesome. There's a reason that we're talking about them like this. They're that freaking good. It's just, they're very, very, enthusiastic thumbs up for me on not just this album, but just up their all the albums that we've covered up until then. There's not a bad album there for no way. Mm-hmm.
So in August of 1975, Robert Plant and his wife got in a serious car accident, and he was unable to tour as a result after that. For a stretch after that. They wrote much of their material for their next album, Presence, titled Presence, during that time period. That album was released, but they did not tour in 1976 either. Presence was released in March of 76, and then they had a concert film and live album also come out in September and October of that year called Song Remains the Same. And at that point, they were the number one rock band in the world, outselling the Rolling Stones in terms of sales. In 77, they set an attendance record by the Guinness Book of World Records at the Pontiac Silverdome in Detroit for 76,229 people, the largest for any band ever up to that point, according to Guinness World Records. And then on July 25th, 77, while on tour in the U.S., Robert Plant unfortunately found out that his 5-year-old son, Carrick, had died of a stomach virus while he was on tour, canceling the rest of the tour immediately. In November of 78, they recorded In Through the Out tour in Sweden, which I don't think we've had any artists record in Sweden before. They played some tours in Europe in the summer of 80. And then, unfortunately, on October 25th, 1980, John Bonham was found dead at 1:45 p.m. by their new tour manager and John Paul Jones. The cause of death was asphyxiation from vomit, and he didn't have any other drugs in his system. He, as we've alluded to or said, he has a history of alcoholism and heavy drinking up to this point. He was drinking heavily the day before. He was placed, taken to bed and placed on his side when he went to bed that night, but he was found dead the next day. The planned tour was canceled after his death, and the band decided to disband. And they released a statement on December 4th, 1980, saying, quote, "We wish it to be known that the loss of our dear friend and the deep sense of undivided harmony felt by ourselves and our manager have led us to decide that we could not continue as we were." Quote, signed Led Zeppelin. The final album they released was called Coda, as John mentioned. It was released in 82, and it was basically a collection of tracks that were floating around on bootlegs that hadn't been released before. And then finally, all three of them have continued to have careers. In fact, Robert Plant and Alison Krauss just put out an album recently that's getting some critical acclaim. They've all had various side projects and, are very well respected at this point. They were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1995, and that concludes the Led Zeppelin story for us. So
there we go.
Yep.
A huge band of the late 60s and 70s. It's kind of crazy when some of these bands come to an end, right, in our run with them. Mm-hmm. When the Beatles or when Hendrix did, or, I think we're done the Who now too, right? We're not doing anymore. So a lot of those big staple bands. We've got a little bit more Stones left, but the page is truly, no pun intended with Zeppelin, but the page is truly turning, isn't it?
It is. And for my money, one of the most consistent bands that we've discussed. As we said, 6 of their albums are all fantastic, and there's not many other bands that we've talked about, the Beatles and a few others that are can say that. So it's easy to see why they were so popular.
And maddening to be like, how did the critics just continually, how does Robert Christgau sleep at night, shitting on Zeppelin that much,
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, he'll tell you about it.
I'm sure he will.
You can read